Welcome to episode 24 of the Brainstorm. We're talking about one of the most eventful weekends of the year, potentially changing the entirety of the future of the human race. Is that too much hyperbole? I don't think so.
I think that's fair to say.
We're talking about OpenAI and SpaceX. Obviously, we'll dive into OpenAI. Brett, maybe if you want to just set the stage. We'll timestamp it because we're getting tweets live as we're talking now, so things may change. It's Monday, November 20th, 3 p.m.
Yeah, so in a shocking announcement, the board of the nonprofit that controls OpenAI announced that they were firing Sam Altman, the CEO, and cited some lack of candidness with the board. This was shocking because OpenAI has the highest velocity business momentum, certainly across all of tech and maybe in tech history. I think, they're reputed to be doing $1 billion in revenue this year, and they've said maybe $5 to $10 billion by next year. They've been embedded into Microsoft. They launched GPT-4. They just cut prices on GPT-4 by some 3x. Everybody is building on top of OpenAI stack. And so to suddenly destabilize the whole company seems insane given the momentum. And boy, did it destabilize the company, because the entire workforce seemed to revolt over the weekend. And now I think 700 out of the 700 and something employees have threatened to quit unless Sam Altman is reinstated. And he seems to have been hired out with his co-founder to Microsoft directly as of this taping. So I think that sets the stage. We can talk about ramifications, but tell me if I've missed anything over the last hour.
No, I think that covers it. The most recent tweet from Sam Altman is, Satya and my top priority remains to ensure OpenAI continues to thrive. We are committed to fully providing continuity of operations to our partners and customers. The OpenAI/Microsoft partnership makes this very doable. So as of now, seems like he's still team Microsoft, but that is subject to change. But I feel like we should just get into the ramifications so far. There's been some prodding from others. You have Meta, who's come out and said, if you want to work for a company that believes AI is actually going to be good for humanity and open source in a true open way, they're willing to hire you. You have different takes. I think it would be interesting to dive in where this leaves Anthropic. Stratechery said that they actually thought this put Anthropic in a worse position. But Brett, interested in
maybe
go ahead.
Yeah.
I think we should maybe start just to set the stage. One, I think the backstory here with Microsoft is interesting because they have invested upwards of, I think it's $10 billion. They own 49% of the company, or will over time, as I think part of the investment in OpenAI. Am I wrong on that? I think that is an important.
Well, no, they own a profit share that then pays out over time, and then their ownership falls out.
Okay.
So part of the root underlying issue here is OpenAI was a nonprofit whose mission was to develop artificial general intelligence for all humanity. And at some point they realized we need a lot of money to do this. And getting money to a nonprofit is hard. You have to go around and beg people. And so they created a profit-making entity underneath that could then raise capital, promising a return to investors so that they could invest in billions of dollars of compute. And Microsoft participated in that profit-making entity, investing $10 billion with, and I'm not sure if this the degree to which we know for certain these are the terms, but it's on the order of they can only get $100 billion in profit out of the profit-making entity. But they did that in part just to get to sign as an exclusive partner to OpenAI's GPT products. And so then embedding those products in kind of Microsoft Office Suite is core to Microsoft's trajectory of growth going forward. So for Satya, who is a cricket World Cup fan, this happened at the worst possible time because he was trying to watch, India versus Australia in the Cricket World Cup, and instead he was receiving a call probably from Sam Altman being like, "I've been fired," and it's very surprising, and Satya being like, "This is terrible and very surprising." And so my interpretation of the current status of what has happened is, one, the entire workforce in OpenAI has been shaken up. All of the startup ecosystem that was building on top of OpenAI is suddenly having to say, well, we need to at least develop to OpenAI plus Anthropic plus maybe Cohere, other large language model API providers, because it's pretty clear that the pace at which things are being developed on OpenAI's platform is going to slow down. Sam Altman and team, some have parachuted over to Microsoft to continue building on top of the work they've already done. They're just going to do it under Microsoft's corporate umbrella now, and maybe they retain some option to spin themselves out as a profitable entity. But you can imagine, there was GPT-5 in the works for OpenAI. Maybe that gets delivered, maybe it doesn't. But from whatever that point is, now Microsoft is going to try to be like, okay, we're going to boost away from here, and then OpenAI will kind of fall apart like a booster stage on a rocket and just disintegrate back to Earth. And I think it shakes up both the talent landscape and the kind of who is our stable development partner landscape sufficient to just level the playing field somewhat. Because even transitioning to Microsoft, there's a whole set of even just transitioning from Google to Office 365 is going to take them a month and a half. Well, a month and a half in AI space is 6 months in normal tech space. So the kind of shake up, the slowdown, the all of the drama has to kind of slow down OpenAI's momentum to some degree. And that just gives kind of competitive introductions to other potential solutions that are out there. And I think that you're likely to have enterprises are fine, this is in Microsoft, this is perfect, we'll continue spending on Microsoft. Enterprises, large enterprises, this is what they want. They just want a reliable, big incumbent partner. But the startup landscape, I think, is really going to have to think about whether or not they're developing to OpenAI now, because that's kind of developing to probably a tech platform that is going to stop shipping. And so then I think from that perspective, it opens up the playing field to Anthropic and XAI and all of these other contenders for the AI crown.
Yeah.
And then one other nuance I think that we did leave out is the fact that Altman may have been fundraising for a hardware component, the chip side of it, which, yeah, I don't know. That was a heavy eye roll there, Brett. But
I think yes. I think that the way in which there is still an untold story as to what it was that the OpenAI board saw that caused them to act so aggressively and suddenly to oust him. It doesn't really make sense as it's being reported today. And so Emmett Shear was brought in as interim CEO for OpenAI. He was previously the Twitch CEO, and he, in his introductory note, he said that or indicated that the board at OpenAI had seen something that was beyond just you're shipping AI too quickly. As in, the concern is the board, which has an interest in artificial general intelligence for all humanity, was uncomfortable with the fact that OpenAI was delivering these amazing products because maybe they would be too powerful. But he seemed to indicate it was something else, and it could be that Sam Altman had recognized that, wow, this is literally a historical company that's being built, and it's within an awkward corporate architecture. If I can fundraise to a separate entity, then I can essentially extract value out of it into a profit-making entity that is outside the purview of the nonprofit. And then if he was not fully disclosed, if they asked him, he was like, "Oh, it's no big deal, it's no conflict at all," then that could be a concern that the board has. Not that kind of with what's happening in OpenAI itself, but the degree to which Sam Altman was trying to navigate around essentially the mission of the controlling entity of the board and take power for himself. But then the real people who got screwed here are the employees in OpenAI who were up to make a lot of money on selling like a new round of capital into the profit-making entity under the nonprofit. And that is probably just totally in shambles now. I doubt that comes off.
I think one of the more interesting details we haven't gotten, there are a ton of details, obviously, and there's so much information flying around, but it's the fact that it was one of the other co-founders that potentially raised the alarm bells about what Sam was doing to the board. And then once the, news got out and the board made their decision, he then, it seems, backtracked and then signed the letter that all of the employees wrote saying he too would leave the company if Sam and team weren't brought back on, which is just, what exactly did he see and what did he bring to the board, I think is the missing link that would tie this full story together, because there are so many moving pieces that we still don't really know why this was set in motion. That's what is so interesting, at least to me. You have, like, to your point, Brett, you have this company is a historical company. No company has ever grown this fast in terms of users or adoption. And it seems that it may have just blown up overnight and we don't even know the reason why.
Right.
Or just how ridiculous, right.
And we
or
still
just how
don't.
ridiculous it is for the concept to be that AGI is going to be controlled by this independent directors, and that's going to save everyone from like the harms of this. It's like you have people tweeting and making these moves. Obviously we don't have full information, but it seems like no one there realized the outcome of their actions to the degree that they have unfolded. Is this the biggest advertisement for open source AI, or do you think that it still needs to be controlled in a tight way for safety reasons?
Well, I've always believed that kind of like the way in which an open source AI foundation, like as in a foundation level that is open source in some way, is going to be the safest possible outcome. And kind of the regulatory efforts that have been put on, I think, actually net reduce our safety so far, because they make it less likely that open source development happens and more likely that kind of like essentially the keys to the AI kingdom are in a handful of kind of like companies that are incentivized to disclose as little as possible about what they're doing to kind of like kneecap competitors that are trying to develop, alternative products. And so I think it's without a doubt that both in terms of like vetting and kind of understanding the capabilities in play and direction of travel, a world with really strong, robust open source models is a safer and probably better world. And I think in terms of like productization and capitalization, there's a lot of having like it's hard to do open source in a really tight iteration loop. Like look at Bitcoin, which is an amazing open source project, and even Ethereum to some degree, and also really critical infrastructure. Kind of nobody would argue that the pace of Bitcoin development is mind blazing. In fact, it's quite slow, and intentionally so. I mean, I think that's a design feature for like a monetary alternative, and I think that AI space is moving so quickly. It's it seems likely that kind of like commercialization efforts that are in kind of like entities that are explicitly profit making are likely to move kind of more quickly, with the wrinkle that Meta, formerly Facebook, is investing in open source models aggressively and has their own monetization strategy on top of that, but thinks that they can kind of like provide infrastructure to the world that they'll take advantage of as well.
What do you think this means for the foundation model thesis? And maybe you can set that up, because
Sure.
Does this change where the value will accrue in the tech stack? Like you're talking about Facebook building on top of the foundation model, but the open source layer is going to be potentially that foundation model if this pushes everything in that direction.
Yeah. I mean, I think just to lay it out, we think that AI software is going to deliver a 4 to 5 times productivity boost to knowledge workers globally by 2030, meaning that like, and on that basis, you can come to a conclusion that there's going to be around $14 trillion spent on AI software. You do some further math and you're like, well, that's like a $90 to $100 trillion market cap opportunity for AI software right there. And then we have a breakdown of how much does that go, how much goes to like Anthropic or OpenAI or some kind of foundation model provider, and then how much to vertical specific software plays within that. And so our rough guess was, hey, 25% of that is to foundation model providers. Those are probably lower margin opportunities, but then there's only a few of them that survive. And I think it's still likely, in my view, that you have like a big, broad open source one that services a lot of companies, and then, you know, maybe two like other foundation model providers that are closed and kind of offer, you know, differentiated performance or integration offerings, and kind of build off of there. Does this shift the playing field towards one or the other? It probably does, just because OpenAI has, just like on a performance basis, such a lead relative to the other offerings. And so you could have imagined a scenario where they're kind of running away with the ball and kind of accruing all the data and all the profits and all the data and all the profits. And so they become a very strong kind of like, think of it like Apple versus Android. They become the thing that extracts all of the profits out of the ecosystem. And then Android, you know, just provides infrastructure to everybody, but there's not a lot of kind of profit directly in Android. And similar to, like, if you think about Android's value to Google, it's distribution and to basically serving as like Google Search's default front end. Like Meta's play is to provide like that broad open source kind of substrate, and that then provides distribution or kind of the tools that build out Meta's existing portfolio of apps and platforms and can monetize indirectly via advertising or you know, transaction facilitation. So I think there's a lot. So I think this maybe like makes open source like likely to have a bigger footprint, just because, hey, the whole playing field's been shaken up and kind of the leader is going to fall apart. And so then there's going to be a lot of jockeying between the commercial models and maybe some pricing competition. But we'll see.
All right. So then, Nick, do you have, I was going to do a wrap up here.
Yeah, well, I have one more
right.
question, just in terms of thinking about Microsoft's potential play here. Do you think it's at all possible that they just come in and gobble up the whole company, right? Like they're going out, they've taken some very important people, Sam, the other co-founder, you know, it seems like they'll be able to steal away employees, right? Like the employees are rebelling at this point. Microsoft has a vested interest in OpenAI. What is stopping them from coming in and saying, we're just going to, you know, we're going to take care of this. We're going to, you know, put the drama behind us. This is all going behind the scenes now, and we'll run it as, you know, a subsidy of Microsoft. It's already.
But they couldn't.
Yeah, go ahead.
They couldn't buy the nonprofit, because the nonprofit that's against the nonprofit's mission, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're actually, Microsoft effectively is trying to do that. They're saying, we're going to take all the talent, and there's a certain set of agreements we have with the OpenAI that we are going to like take where OpenAI developed to all the talent building on top of that. And then meanwhile, it's basically going to be like, and we're going to fork development into Microsoft for profit off of whatever OpenAI has done. And then we'll leave kind of like that wilting husk of an entity behind. And so there's not, if, you know, 700 out of 750 or whatever employees are going to leave, like, what do you need the new CEO for, who's going to do a 30-day review of what happened? And it's just like all right, later, you know, you have all of the lifeblood, and you have access to at least the kind of like the knowledge of the development pathway, and access to the underlying models and checkpoints to the degree that the licensure sharing allows them to. So there's probably some lost work there, but I think that they've basically extracted a lot of value out of this, maybe even more so. Like, I thought they were in real trouble on Sunday when kind of like the OpenAI situation was going to fall apart. And I assumed Sam was going to raise money into a new entity, and then Microsoft would get cut out. And instead, I don't know what they offered to Sam Altman, as like, maybe it's like succession as CEO of Microsoft or something. But they had to provide something that he felt like he was going to be free and clear to develop on, and probably incentivize his talent to move over. So maybe it's like an ability to spin out kind of whatever entity he's in at his option, or something like that. we'll see.
Yeah.
All right. So as we wrap this up, we're gonna try something new. Brett, biggest takeaway from this? The one big takeaway. Nick, you're coming up next.
Okay.
Gosh, does corporate structure matter? And you've seen this across. I mean, certainly, like in the FTX case, where there was no corporate structure to speak of, that really allowed that entity to dissolve so spectacularly. And here, the couching of kind of like the profit-making entity under this nonprofit that really had a different responsibility than a traditional board would, ultimately eviscerated the company. And I think it really actually shows why kind of the super voting shares that Mark Zuckerberg has are so important. Why kind of giving founders the ability to like shift the entity to where they need to go in a really rapid tech moving landscape is more vital and important than ever. And also that like profit motive, there's lots of problems with profit motive, but it's actually a very clean score sheet. Whereas if you have somebody who changes the way they're doing something because they feel queasy about it, or because because there's like some subjective measure where they're going to be unpopular, then it results in really bizarre behavior and outcomes that aren't stable platforms on top of which to build new things.
Yeah, there's definitely some Atlas Shrugged vibes occurring over the weekend. Nick, your big takeaway.
I will summarize it in one sentence. Risk happens fast. If you had told me in the beginning of the year that Sam Altman would be out at OpenAI and they would, their future would be in jeopardy, and that Mark Zuckerberg, of all people, and Meta are leading the open source movement after being the notorious gatekeeper of advertising for the past, decade plus, I would have told you, you're crazy and that can't happen. And it just happened in 3 days' time and seemingly overnight, when all of this went down. So I would say risk happens fast. Keep an eye out always. Things may not be what they seem on the surface.
And then maybe I'll just go a slant take here is get on X. It's like if you weren't on X, you probably didn't even know any of this was happening. Really the amount of news that emerged and all of the angles, everyone from OpenAI, sending hearts to each other, the nuances there. If you're not there, I feel like you're not really getting the news as you should. But we'll leave that for another time. Moving on to humanity changing event number 2 was the Starship launch. So this was the second Starship attempt from SpaceX. And just a summary of what happened. All rocket engines worked, which was a step up from the first attempt. There's the super heavy booster, and you've got the Starship on top. They went up. They split with a new technique called hot staging. So the engines on the Starship started as these were still burning, and the booster broke off, did a nice little flip, then exploded. It was supposed to come down in a more controlled manner, but it didn't. And then you have Starship, which continued on for about another 6 minutes, all rocket engines working. And then it sounds like there was a self-destruct command that was triggered for some reason. And so, you may read headlines out there saying this was a failure because the full goal was to land the super heavy booster down in the water gently, and then to have Starship go all the way around Earth and then splash down north of Hawaii. But I think, this was a tremendous success from SpaceX's point of view and from Starship's development. Having all rocket engines work was tremendous. Having the hot staging separation work was the main goal, and the fact that they demonstrated that and were able to collect data for 30 seconds after the separation before it exploded, I think will make the next launch that much better. And I think one of the things, Brett, that you've mentioned and was written up this weekend as well, actually by the person we had on last week, Eric Berger, is the fact that exploding rockets is good. And and it's like, this is the way that it should be done. And if you're trying to go risk free, you wind up going much slower, and it winds up being infinitely more expensive. And that's why you have, NASA's rockets that cost billions of dollars, compared to what SpaceX gets to, and having reusable rockets. But Brett, I don't know if you want to expand on that or
Yeah,
share your thoughts.
I think the most, just from a high level perspective, one, every rocket from every other company in the world that goes up doesn't come back down in one piece. So the fact that SpaceX landed a rocket in 2015, and here we are 8 years later, and there's nobody else who has at least landed an orbital rocket, is in some ways astounding, like shocking. This is not it's like, Sam, you're a runner. When somebody runs a 4-minute mile, then people realize it's possible, and so then they do it. But it's a testament to SpaceX's business process that in order to land rockets, you have to risk looking like an idiot along the way, and they're willing to take the reputational damage that's required to actually increase their velocity of improvement. And same here. It's like you could spend another year doing simulation to try to prevent kind of like the disaster, quote unquote, from happening. Or you can launch as quickly as possible, and then you collect the most robust data of what's going on with the system, which allows you to make the best engineering choices for the next rocket. And it allows you to kind of accelerate your rate of actual manufacturing production. I think Elon mentioned they have three boosters like in assembly right now, and they're going to launch again next month. And so kind of they'll get, that many more kind of innovation turns, before a marginal competitor even gets something on a launch pad.
Right. Oh, that's the other piece. The launch pad held up. So that's like another big thing. From the first launch, they really demolished the ground. They did a true scorched earth. But now the plate saved everything, so they will be able to turn around. And Brett, to your point, I think it's a good one in that by the time someone else reuses a orbital rocket, SpaceX is likely well on its way with Starship being reusable. In which case, what good is your tiny little reusable rocket?
Yeah. What is your estimate of the cost per ton to orbit of Starship versus, or what's the cost differential between Starship and the Falcon 9?
So we think the initial, I'm sure that there will be progress. So, I think you can get down to $200 per kilogram to orbit in a reasonable time frame. And then if you get to true reusability, the way that Elon's spoken about it, and you're just kind of taking into account refueling, and the rest of the architecture is there and infrastructure is there, then, we think you could probably get it all the way down to the tens of dollars per kilogram to low Earth orbit.
And what is the Falcon 9 today?
The Falcon 9 today is roughly like $1,500. Right. If you're looking,
so
it depends. From what they're charging or what it actually costs them. Like, we think that they're right. From the math that we've seen, we think SpaceX can actually refurbish the first stage of a Falcon 9 for like $1 million or less, just based on how quickly they can turn it. But they are still charging $60 million per launch.
So, like, conceptually, somebody getting to reusable on a small rocket, if SpaceX has already crossed to like Starship reusable, they're still like a 10x behind in terms of cost per kilogram to orbit.
Exactly. Any oh, go ahead, Nick.
I have one request, and it's just that you tell the story around what SpaceX had to do to get this launch ready to go, specifically with seals and sonic booms. Can you please let people know?
Everyone should watch the Elon Lex Friedman podcast that they did recently. Elon describes that to get the approval from the wildlife services, they had to take a wild seal, strap it to a board, put some headphones on it, and play sonic booms to see how it would impact the seal. And so he posts the photo out there, so you can see this poor little seal just strapped to the board, in for the wild ride of its life.
Crazy.
I mean,
Yep.
yeah, I don't know.
But we'll keep it consistent. Brett, key takeaway.
I think this is another step towards becoming an Actually, my key takeaway is we are going to see a Cybertruck strapped to the top of a Starship doing like a launch into orbit sometime over the next couple of years. I think we're going to have a Cybertruck in space.
That's real advertising.
Yeah.
Nick, your key takeaway here.
That the photography of these launches is just incredible. I don't know who's putting these photos together, but from what I've seen, even the video footage is just tremendous. I mean, the fact that we're able to watch this in real time is just very cool with the fidelity that we get. But I think, I mean, the tech side is that I think it is insane that no one has been able to land another orbital rocket, as you mentioned, Brett. Like, to me, I think the running analogy is perfect. You know, the follow-on effect, once people know something can be accomplished, it's usually pretty fast. And the fact that this hasn't been accomplished by anyone else speaks to SpaceX's lead in this area.
Yeah, I think that's the key takeaway for me is, one, SpaceX is not complacent in any way. They're continuing to push at the risk frontier to get to the next level. It's a matter of when, not if, Starship works, in my opinion. And the degree to which they are ahead of competition is pretty astounding. I think that's it on the official topics. I do want to just dive into this because I did research this for a newsletter I was writing with a friend one time. So the 4-minute mile, there's wide debate around the Roger Bannister, and the claim is actually a lot of people were already running around and sub 4-minute miles, but his was the marketed one. And so it's like there were already a lot of people in like doing this and around there, but he got the crowd, he got the, endorsements. And so people started paying attention to it because it was like noted down and a big deal. But if you look at the other results from around that time, it's like it wasn't like he did it and all of a sudden people started doing it. It's like, no, this was the trend, and it was going there with or without him.
So you're saying I like invented or quoted a false narrative that kind of him doing it enabled people to do it.
Well, it's a shared history that's believed. So
I'll end on another thought / question. Are we getting faster as humans, or is sports technology helping us break all of these milestones?
I think we still are getting faster, but technology, and this is a good question too, because it's like in running, people are okay with these super shoes, but swimming, it happened first and they banned them from competition. And so it's interesting to see why we've decided that some technology is okay and other technology isn't.
Well, it's kind of like, are you interested in the time? Are you interested in the human performance relative to other human performance? As in, kind of is it important to be like to measure what you're talking about, Nick? Like, are humans getting faster, or to measure like, is humans equipped with the right tools getting faster?
Well, yeah, I guess I think of it as if you took the best athletes and runners from 60, 50 years ago and gave them everything runners have today, would they be equally as performative? Or
No.
are, humans evolving to like become faster in each generation?
I don't think we're evolved. Oh, go ahead, Brett. You go first.
Well, it's like, I think it's inextricable. Like, shoes is one thing, but also there's diet. There's I'm sleeping in like a hypobaric chamber.
Yeah.
There's, it's like all of the, like, you draw a line around technology at some point, but then everything upwind of that is also technology. And so you can't like disentangle it all.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say is it's like you read old sports, but I just read Open, and it's like you read about Andre Agassi training. And it's like, okay, he trained a lot like crazy, but you're like, these back then, it's like these people weren't doing anything compared to what people are doing now with respect to coaches. And it's like nutrition still largely unknown, I would say, in terms of science.
Yeah, I bucket all of that into the progression of technology, right? Like our understanding of what training should look like. I think I bucket into the technology camp because that's just added knowledge we didn't have back then. So if you gave an athlete 50 years ago the same training plan that someone had today, would they be just as good? I would say yes. You're shaking your head no, Sam.
I'm going.
So we disagree.
Yeah.
We'll never know. That's the problem. But
I do think we should get what's his name?
Johnson.
The guy who's we should get him on the podcast, learn about what he's doing. I think there's probably some interesting things. Nick, you sent me his video this morning. The guy who's
the blueprint guy.
Yeah. This is that. It's like that's what people always they say. Oh, I'm going to write this off because it's crazy. And then 50 years down the line, people are like, oh, maybe he was ahead of his time. Also, I'll just throw, we're really going over time here. Alan Cousins on Twitter. If you're an athlete, great follow, great data-driven insights into training. All right. We'll see everyone next week for episode 25.
Thanks, y'all.
See you, everyone.